This is John Jackson Miller. I'm the founder and curator of Comichron.com, the world's largest public database of comic book sales figures, here with the sales charts for January 2019. These charts, as usual, come from Diamond Comic Distributors, which releases some raw data each month, and then we're able to work some statistical magic on it and do some research and turn it into an overall figure for the month and add some more context, historical and otherwise. Now, for January 2019, the theme for the month really kind of should be a big head start. And that is because, we have a situation in the calendar here in December and January where the charts tend to vary quite a lot from what you expect is going to happen. In December, sales were a good deal worse than we expected that they would be. January, they're a good deal better. And in part, what's happening there is we saw Diamond take Christmas week off. They did ship a number of comic books, just limited special issues from Marvel and DC and the other publishers. They shipped them to arrive the week before Christmas, and they weren't put on sale until the day after Christmas. But otherwise, the number of other books that were put on the shelves in that time was kind of limited. And in fact, DC Comics, if you saw our video for December, had just 52 comic books out in the month. That is a 28-year low for DC. That is significant. January, we saw the market come roaring back. We have healthy-sized slates from all the publishers. And in fact, it turned out to be the largest January in terms of nominal dollars in the Diamond exclusive era. And that includes January 2015, which was the month that Star Wars #1 came out. That was a $43.75 million month. Again, you adjust for inflation. That probably beats January 2019. But even so, it's been a while since we've had any numbers that were superlative in any way. And so we have a pretty good start to the year here. January 2019 versus December 2018, we see that unit sales were up 13.5%, dollar sales for comics up 12%, graphic novel sales up 43%, and then in total comics graphic novel dollars were up 19.5%, almost 20% versus the 1 month versus the previous one. And again, that is because there's material that might have come out in the last week of December that publishers decided to hold to January. And of course, January is already a 5-week month, so it gets an advantage there. Now, if we compare January of 2019 versus January of 2018, we're looking at two different 5-week months. So there's an even comparison there. And we see that Diamond's, comic sales in units up 5%, dollars for comics up 15%, and graphic novel dollars up 12%. And that nets out to be 14.33% increase this year versus the previous year. So that's a good number to start the year with. Again, it's $44.9 million. That is $5 million more than the previous January. We're looking here at 7.04 million comic books purchased by retailers. That is 300,000 more comic books than they purchased in January of 2018. And so that is a good start. And that's, in fact, around the range for the first month of the year for several of the healthier years this decade, although some of those Januaries got to their 7 million comics with one fewer shipping week. Now, as mentioned, the new releases are one of the reasons that this is a bigger month than usual. Marvel at 102 comics shipped. DC back to normal, more or less, with 87 comics shipped. Image 57. And this ends up working out to be an increase of 8% in comics overall versus the previous January, and 21% more graphic novels released in January than in the previous January. Now, if you're thinking that it's kind of difficult to compare Januaries or compare Decembers or compare January with December, you're right. The holidays do complicate things. So one thing that we can do is look at January and December together and see what would these 2 months look like if they were actually, one reporting period. We still have a couple of years there in the last decade where there were only 8 new comic book days in the 2 months, but most of the time it's 9 weeks. And what we see here is that we're at 913 new comic books released in December 18, January 19. That is down slightly from the previous year, and in fact, the last several years, we had a peak at 1,006, December 15, January 16. The number of comics that retailers purchased is at 13.25 million in December 18, January 2019. That is an increase of about 300,000 from the year before. We see here that if you go further back, there are better years in the middle of the decade, but we're still ahead of the 2010, 2011, and 2011, 2012 combinations. That figure there for December 16, January 17, that number is artificially inflated because that was that month in January of 2017 where Marvel did a big overship for its entire line. That is not in play this time around. The new graphic novels released, 627 over the 2-month period. That does sort of even out once we add December in there, and the comparison between that and the previous year is just about even. And then finally, we look at the number of dollars in the market, $82.55 million worth of material. That's what retailers bought in December 18, January 2019. And as we see, that's up almost $5 million over the same period in 2017, 2018. And, the question people will have is, well, if we had had a normal December, if there had been a Christmas shipping week that had just had the same amount of material that it normally has, would we have ended up still being down for the year? Because we ended up being down for the year by about 1%. The answer is not something you can come to simply, because January has a lot of comics in it that would have been shipped in January anyway. And it's not always easy to look at a title and say, well, this would have come out in late December if only it had been a normal month for Diamond. What we can do, however, is combine the months from February to January. If we pretended that the new year started on February 1st, we do see that the last 12 months are slightly ahead of the preceding 12 months running from December 2016 to November 2017. Just slightly ahead. So yeah, indeed, we probably would have crossed the finish line either flat for the year or just slightly ahead. Let's move on to the market shares, where we'll see that Marvel is leading both units and dollars here at the start of the year. 41% units, 39% dollars. DC at 30% dollars. Image at 7.5%. Dark Horse at 4%. IDW at close to 4%. This Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse order of reporting is kind of like a return to old times, because that is the order that we saw it for much of the latter part of the 1990s and the first part of the 2000s. Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse in that order. And then looking further down the charts here, it's Boom, Dynamite, Viz, all above 1%. And then Titan and Archie in the bottom part of the top 10. Moving on to the best-selling comics, we see that Batman Who Laughs #2 is the #1 comic book in units in January. That repeats the performance of that title, which was #1 in December. After, we have 3 first issues, all from Marvel. Captain Marvel #1 in second place, Guardians of the Galaxy #1 in third, Conan the Barbarian #1 in fourth, and Amazing Spider-Man #14 in fifth. Looking further down the charts, we see Batman 62 and 63 as our sole comic books that are more than a year old in terms of the how long the title is run. In 6th and 7th place, Heroes in Crisis 4 and 5 in 8th and 9th, and then Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man #1 in 10th. Now, when we look at the number of dollars that retailers paid for these comics, we see that Captain Marvel #1 becomes the top comic book in the dollar charts. And this is in spite of the fact that it has the same cover price that Batman Who Laughs #2 does. Now, the reason for this is that the Dollar charts are based on what retailers paid in. This is a case where probably the retailers who bought Batman Who Laughs #2 ended up paying Diamond slightly less because perhaps the mix of retailers got a better discount from the mix of retailers that ordered Captain Marvel #1. This is something that happens all the time, and it is indicative that when we see the numbers, the final estimates for these comics, these two comic books should be pretty close together in unit sales terms. Further down this list, we see one new comic book appearing. That's Young Justice #1, a $4.99 title, which leaps onto the charts into 7th place. Moving on to graphic novels, we'll see that the Dark Knight's Metal softcover was the #1 graphic novel in units in what was, again, a very good month for graphic novel sales. It is followed by Infinity Gauntlet, which was the best-selling graphic novel of all of 2018. In 2nd place, Life of Captain Marvel in 3rd. Star Wars Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith Volume 4 is in 4th. Cosmic Ghost Rider is in 5th place. Black Hammer Volume 3, Farmhand Volume 1, Dark Days, The Road to Metal, Batman White Knight, and Spider-Geddon, Edge of Spider-Geddon round out the top 10. Looking at dollars, we see that Conan the Barbarian Omnibus Volume 1 is the #1 graphic novel in dollars, and again, this is part of that whole return of Conan to Marvel that took place in 2019, 4 years after Star Wars returned to Marvel. Also having returned from Dark Horse. So we'll see that in the dollar charts, the reason that book is up there is it's $125. Some other large entries on that chart include Marvel Masterworks Uncanny X-Men Volume 11 at $100, House of Mystery Bronze Age Omnibus Volume 1 at $99. And again, these are based on what retailers paid in. So this is a much different chart in terms of the titles that are on it. That's our early look at the comic sales charts for January 2019. The estimates, once they're posted, will be on the January 2019 page, which you can reach from the monthly comic sales page or several other different menu selections on Comichron.com. And so until next time, this is John Jackson Miller, and I will see you in the comic shop.